Dum da dum da 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 dum da dum da 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 dum da dum da 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 da. Why haven't I told you? Oh baby, I've told every little star just how sweet I think you are. Why haven't I told you? Da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I've told ripples in a brook made my heart an open book. Why haven't I told you? Friends ask me, am I in love? I always answer yes. Might as well confess if the answer's yes. Maybe you may love me too. Oh, my darling, if you do, why haven't you told me? Da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Welcome to the Fix Your Heart or Die podcast network. My name is Shy Fox, and ever since discovering a love of Twin Peaks recently, my mind has taken up full-time residence within its borders. Since entering this Lynchian zone, I have noticed that many seem to find David's work outside of Twin Peaks intimidating to approach. That's why I'm on a quest to also experience his entire catalog and provide a pathway into his genius for my fellow newcomers. So I implore you to come along because, no matter who you are, Lynch's log has something to say to you.
In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. You have your good things, and I have mine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. You have your good things, and I have mine. In heaven, everything is fine.
Welcome to Fix Your Heart or Die. I'm Shy Fox, your host here, and with me, as always, so far, is Laura Kate Dale. Laura, how are you this evening?
Apparently you just can't get rid of me. I'm like a bad rash. I'm still here.
All right, and with us for the first time is Jane. Jane, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I'll start off by asking, since I already know this about Laura, what is your general David Lynch experience? I know that this is the second time you've seen Eraserhead in a couple of months, and it's your initial viewings of that, but how about the other body of work here?
So my first experience was tuning into the last episode of season 2 of Twin Peaks.
Oh.
Like literally the last 5 minutes of it. My first encounter of Lynch was watching Carl McLaughlin ram his head into a mirror, saying "How's Annie" over and over again, and going, "I need to know what this show is."
Wow.
And it took me, I want to say, nearly like a decade to finally get everything on VHS.
I mean, it was not really a small undertaking back in the day. Something that really is a continuing theme of this podcast is, even though all media should be accessible at all times now, if we lived in any sort of a sane society, a lot of things are still fairly unavailable, including a lot of Lynch's work. But it's gotten a lot better from when you literally were not allowed to buy a product of a show that contained a show that you wanted to watch or catch up on. It was just, I think it took season 2 specifically a very long time for that to come out on any sort of whole media, correct?
I remember when I was about, I want to say 19, I bought a VHS box set. It had 10 cassette tapes in it, and it was everything except the pilot episode. And for some reason, there wasn't a license in UK region to put the pilot episode out.
Sure, yeah.
So I managed to track down everything, but I hadn't seen just that initial setup, which made some of the rest of it very confusing early on.
And as I'm sure you're both aware, that's likely due to the fact that outside of the US, the Twin Peaks pilot was actually made into a sort of feature-length episode that contained original footage. So I assume there was some sort of snafu between, do we include the American original when we compile this, or do we use the international version that literally does not make sense in the continuing canon of the show and put it on there? But what a bizarre way. Sell 7 out of 8 episodes of a show.
Oh, yeah.
This means that we now have 2 people on this episode who started Twin Peaks at a random place somewhere in the middle.
At pretty much one of the more insane times. I think we found the most backwards ways into this possible, Jane. So congratulations. Yeah. And as you can tell by the fact that I haven't even given you a proper intro, so I'll do that in just a sec. But I just want to say this project is full of amazing coincidences like that. So it's just incredible that I had no prior knowledge that you had such an interesting avenue into this as well. That's a really neat treat to get live on the air here. So Jane, what is your last name and what's your general deal? Justify your entire existence to me in about 2 minutes if you could. That'd be great.
I'm Jane Magnet Dale. I stream, I do podcasts. I'm very luckily married to this lovely lady Laura.
Yes,
Yay!
exactly.
Yeah, we got married on a train. It was a brilliant time.
We did.
Yeah, this is a classic Nepo move for the podcast, getting someone who clearly is not qualified to be speaking about pop culture in any way, just because they're related to someone who happens to be on here. It just sickens me.
Look, when you said you needed someone to come on this episode, I was like, who is more qualified than A, the person that got me into watching Twin Peaks, and B, the person who has been doing the rewatch of all of the Lynch media with me while I get ready for all of these recordings.
It's pretty much perfect, because in a lot of ways, Laura, I think you have a lot more Twin Peaks experience than I, but as far as Lynch's other work goes, it seems like we're pretty lock in step with just now getting to this in our middle ages. I don't want to prescribe middle age to you, but I've accepted that mantle upon myself personally.
I mean, it's taken me until now to like properly sit down and watch most of Lynch's films, not in the context of someone put it on because it's weird and trippy.
Yes, exactly, because I had seen Eraserhead around the age of 18 on mushrooms. I hadn't seen Eraserhead. I saw The Inside of My Own Brain, which this movie it will helpfully illustrate what's inside my brain for me in ways that I'm deeply embarrassed to admit, as I was saying in our little preamble there. But boy, so I'll start off by asking this. I don't mean to sound uncouth and I don't mean to tokenize anybody, but one of the things that really interests me, having a pair like yourselves here, is that to me, this movie feels like seeing the raw image of masculinity projected onto celluloid in the most painful and embarrassing way I could imagine it being. And I wonder how that reads to someone outside of the male perspective, if I'm being honest, because I haven't heard a lot of scholarly academic type opinions on this. So both of you, whichever order you want to champ at the bit in, how does this read to someone who isn't a 34-year-old man, which I am and Jack Nance literally was at the time of this film's release? Boy, how does it feel to someone who's looking at it from an outside point of view like that?
After you, Deb.
I am fascinated to hear this perspective. This is not a read I got on either of these 2 most recent viewings.
Wow.
I'm sure we will get to this. I will be honest, I have been reading this almost entirely through the lens of it sure would suck to be a young David Lynch with autism struggling with sensory processing issues while trying to raise a baby. Like, that's very much the lens that I see this film through, and I'm deeply fascinated in this very alternate take to me.
Wow. All right.
I can see it, especially on this viewing. I think I spent more time looking at a couple of moments in this, bits I'd had thoughts about before, and I'll probably get into it as we sort of go more through the movie. But
Is this going to be about your take about the sperm, Jane? Is this this going to be the connective tissue?
The connective tissue to the sperm, so to speak.
yeah, it is the collective mopping up of the tissue. Yeah, because initially I had taken the opening of this of being like, we are, in metaphor, seeing the sex that caused the baby that we see later on in the film. We see Sideways Henry floating in space, and he gobs up this, maybe a sperm creature? It's got kind of a head, it's got kind of a flagellum, and it flies towards the meatball planet. At one point, we fly through a little trench on the meatball planet.
And look, I read this continually as, like, the thing being a fetus with attached umbilical cord, but sperm does make a lot of sense in a lot of places in this. There's a lot of places it does read.
But also that sperm does kind of have the baby's head.
It does.
There's a couple of times when you see it close up and it's like, that's definitely the baby's head. So it's his DNA going into the baby.
I suppose so. Like, not to jump around it too much, I was seeing it as the head being on it was, this is the fetus and it's the thing it's sort of connected to that's keeping it alive. But, yeah.
Well, and you say that that's a reading on it, by the way. Even Wikipedia agrees, seemingly as an objective fact, they are spermatozoan creatures, it seems, which it's so interesting to think of it not being seen as exactly what you guys are saying it is, but I suppose someone could. So what in your experience has been another reading on this as you've gone out there and you've gathered other opinions about this? What have you found more compelling of an explanation other than the obvious metaphor?
I can't avoid seeing it as a fetus and umbilical cord, and I know that is not, like, the most obvious reading, but it's the reading that, like, without jumping too far ahead into things, it's the lens through which I observe a lot of stuff, like the radiator woman stamping on the sperm-esque things, before she then goes into singing about how everything's perfect in heaven. A lot of what I keep seeing is the very barest amount of technically going to be a person. And there's some places that we'll get to where, like, that reading works for me and makes sense for me, while I am of the opinion I am being outnumbered correctly about it being intended to be sperm.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, you can't get more outnumbered than the entire Wikimedia Foundation, and you wouldn't really want to transgress against their opinions. They know some powerful folks over there. So the opening of this film, like you say, it's very abstract, and for, I want to say, at least a solid 10 to 12 minutes, there is no dialogue in this movie whatsoever. I clocked that both times.
Yeah, I would need to double check this. I looked this up after the first viewing. I think it is 12 minutes before we get the first of any dialogue.
Which is remarkable. And so I can totally see how someone could watch this, like I did back when I did it on mushrooms, most likely, and say, this is so crazy. Why would anyone put this to film? This makes no sense. How did he even convey putting this to film? And then you have a lifetime of lived experience. And the difference now is I look at it and I say, how can anyone think about things like conception and fatherhood and the trials of being an autistic young man your entire life? How could someone depict these things more literally on screen? And how could someone misunderstand them? Even my younger self, I feel shame for the fact that I found this so inscrutable, frankly.
Yeah, it's that intro is really interesting, because I was thinking a lot about it on this additional viewing. One of the things that really stands out to me in that opening up to where we get the first bit of dialogue, or up until the point where he gets to his apartment building, not only do we not hear dialogue, we don't hear sounds that are being produced by Henry, if that makes sense. There is a point where he, like, steps noticeably in a puddle. There's no splash. There is no sound. It is this really lonely walk home that feels like someone deliberately trying to avoid getting home, trying to take the long route, someone trying to avoid getting somewhere they don't want to be, who is so overwhelmed by these sounds and sensory experiences all around them that, like, even the sounds of the impact they're having on the world are kind of drowned out by it. And I think, like, that, until I am home and somewhere familiar, I don't even hear myself stepping in the puddle. Like, there's just too much else going on in a set of scenes that seem so empty and should be so quiet, is, like, really stood out to me.
It does really speak to the autism of the whole thing. A lot of the overwhelming noises that a lot of people will just be like, it's just background noise, just tune it out. It's like, no, it's very there. There's the sounds of wind. We constantly get the sounds of wind, of electricity, of rain a couple of times. There's lots of very overwhelming sounds that constantly swell up. And I think this is something that you might miss if you're watching it at home for the first time, either second screening it, or it's not the whole thing, or you're high on weed or mushrooms, that you wouldn't necessarily appreciate, and that I only really got when we were sitting and watching it in the cinema, because there are moments when it is massively overwhelming. Like, it will go from quite dark, not super well lit through a lot of it, to suddenly just complete brilliant white and overwhelming sound. It's like, yeah, that is massively overwhelming.
Yeah.
In a way that you'd probably just turn down quickly at home.
Yeah, the early one of those that I think really stands out is when he first gets back to his apartment and that whistling of the radiator. That sound that is just present from moment one of getting into the apartment, and it's ever present enough that, like, even when he tries to put in his record on and tries to, like, do the various things that you would traditionally associate with drowning out background noise, it's still there, it's still present, and it's in this very specific register where nothing is quite drowning it out. And it's one of those examples of, like, a very... The film does, like, a few of these. A very autism thing of the sound that is really tuned to annoy an autistic brain, but not anyone else's. You get it with this, you get it with the flickering halogen lights later. It's the... Can't you all hear that sound all the time?
Yeah, which is a thought that Lynch has never stopped screaming at us. He's begging everyone to just understand how painful it can be to be alive and just experience all of this that most people take for granted and drown out automatically.
Lynch really does seem to, like, look, I'm not one to armchair diagnose, but I don't know many non-autistic people who talk about the deafening hum of electricity and how electricity is a loud, oppressive force just by its presence.
No, not a lot of people sit around and recognize that. So the thing is, you say we can't armchair diagnose when an entire community comes around a person seemingly to armchair diagnose them. There's probably a little bit more validity to it. Not that any of us knew him as friends, but as Jonathan said in our pilot episode, more so than a lot of directors, because Lynch has a way of portraying his exact thoughts in such a raw manner on screen. Because of that, you get such a direct connection with his mind in a lot of ways that even more so than you feel with a lot of directors, it feels like a parasocial connection in a way that felt very ahead of its time, I'm sure, back when people didn't think of themselves as friends with film directors because they were just hanging out online all the time and such. But you really do feel like you know him as a person by the end of this movie, because so I have to imagine that some quote unquote casual viewers would see this film and go, well, I don't understand what's going on, because why would a man act like this? And then if you go in with some vague awareness of how David Lynch has conducted himself throughout his life, and then you look at what Jack Nance is doing on screen, you say, oh, well, yeah, that's exactly what David Lynch was doing when he was in these situations. He is just basically being puppeteered by him.
I mean, it does look like he is literally playing young David Lynch in this film.
Yeah, and you see that with the junior magician in Twin Peaks. The mini Lynch.
Yes, absolutely. And he does this in several different ways because he hits us over the head with these doppelganger themes for a reason. He wants to show us that he can be more than one character in this at once. And I think this might be a radical take, but I don't know. Is this one of the more artful ways that a self-insert protagonist has been done? Is this because in so many ways, so much of media can feel very clumsy and needless and sort of a crutch, but when there's a perspective like this to be brought to the table, it would be a disservice to try to distance him from Lynch. So to the point where he's pretty much wearing a Lynch costume down to the wig and such. It would feel hacky in a lot of other circumstances, but it feels necessary here. Does that sound radical to you, Jane? What do you think?
I think by virtue of the fact that Henry's character is not glorified, he's the main focus, but he's not a hero. He's not necessarily seen as brave or bold or super skilled at anything specifically. I think whereas you might get another person who would put themselves into a book and make themselves the hero, they would make themselves the saviour, a god, whatever. I think by virtue of making him kind of a loser, someone who's struggling, someone who looks overwhelmed or scared all of the time, I think by virtue of that you can get away with putting that self-insert character in there.
Exactly.
I think it would feel a lot more awkward of a self-insert if it wasn't for things like when he sits down at Mary's home on the sofa, and he sits down in such a way that, like, his arm has pulled half his jacket up, and he's too awkward to, like, readjust and pull it back down. He's like, I sat down like this, I can't do anything about it now. It's like, those moments of, like, almost painfully uncomfortable in his own skin, I think you're right, really do help to keep him from feeling the negatives we usually associate with a self-insert.
Such as self-aggrandizement. If there's validation being sought here, it's not being sought very thoughtfully. He's not presenting these thoughts and turning to the room and saying, right, guys? We're all normal for feeling this way, right? This is great to live like this.
If he's doing anything, he's presenting like, hey, I really struggle with some aspects of myself. Please tell me I'm not alone in struggling with these.
And in a way, not to be hyperbolic again, it feels like a borderline public service on behalf of the neurodivergent community to create a protagonist like this that is such a direct neural pathway from a specific type of mind like ours into this experience, because even though he's self-inserting and he's putting his identity into it in some way, he's doing it as a pathway to allow our identities into it, because he functions this way almost as a pure font of empathy, and we can all just pool our empathy into it and share it from all sorts of perspectives. So Laura, I already know a little bit about your life from here and there because we have a parasocial relationship.
Hell yeah, we do.
And so I already know that you obviously, I will let you say, how much do you relate to this? How much has this felt like your late 20s and early 30s in broad strokes?
Look, I can certainly empathize with living in a place where I couldn't get away from noise that I couldn't tune out. In my case, it was living above a pub and having the constant drone of drunk people downstairs that I couldn't tune out. A lot of the sensory aspects and the aspects of trying to navigate, this is a new situation I don't know how to engage with, and it seems like the more I try and fix it, the more new problems are cropping up, and I don't know how I'm supposed to fix that. I can relate to that.
And Jane, how about you?
Yeah, for me, it's the meet the parents moment of initially that first sitting down with Mary's mom and just like the awkwardness of what did we do before you would walk into a house and everyone would be pointed at a television set, and now everyone's sort of just staring at each other in silence, waiting for something to happen.
Sitting there stewing in it, yeah.
Yeah, and then again, like when we meet the dad, when we meet Bill, he's like super friendly, he's smiling, and still it reminds me of that whole thing of, I can't deal with adulty adults. Anyone who feels more adulty than me, I can't be around you, I'm sorry.
What, you're not ready for 20 seconds or 25 seconds of a man smiling and staring at you expectantly, but not making it clear what he's expecting you to do or say?
Yeah, it's like when we go and hang out with your parents.
Wow. Yeah, now we're drilling down to the heart of the matter. So this is what I mean when I say this is really, it's not just a young male relatable thing. This is relatable from so many different aspects because we've all been in situations where we've been around the friends and family of significant others like this. And it's like stepping into another dimension where none of your rules apply. You're playing by all their rules. All the in-jokes are theirs, every bit of history is theirs, and you're just sort of, even though you're very close to them, you're looking in very much from the outside. So tell me about a time, briefly, if you would, first Laura, or first Jane, because I want to alternate here, because I want to know, especially from an other country perspective, something that's very common in the American Midwest, especially, is going over to a friend's house who perhaps has a more diverse palate than yours, or a completely different one, if not more diverse, and you see what they're serving for dinner. You feel very on edge to even be there for something as intimate as a dinner with these people. And then they serve up something that you just have to sit and wonder, why is anyone acting like this is appetizing? How are these people eating this? Like a fetid, rotting Cornish game hen.
It's funny you say game hen, because the moment that immediately popped into my head was a friend that I'd sort of chatted to online a ton, and she kept saying, we're going to hang out. It's like, okay, cool. And I think she'd recently broken up with one of her girlfriends, so it was like, well, come on, I'm back with my parents at the moment. Don't worry, I've got my server set up. We'll watch a bunch of films, it'll be fine. We watched Tron 2.0, it was great. And then the parents had a proper sit-down dinner with fine china, and I think it was pheasant and some sort of jam sauce. I never understood putting jam with meat, but sure. And then dessert was plum crumble. I don't think I've ever eaten a plum before or since. And it was just like, I'm gonna force it down me because I don't want to be rude. I know that's worse. But at every moment of this, I am just going to feel horrible. And please don't ask me if I want any more.
That's a classic hide it in your napkin kind of meal if I've ever heard one. Yeah. How about you, Laura? What was one of your formative experiences in rejecting hospitality?
Oh, yeah, so I, as an autistic person specifically with a whole bunch of food texture sensitivities and a whole bunch of foods that I just cannot make myself swallow because too many textures, my brain freaks out, I had to master the talent of, if I was going to someone's house who did not know I was quote-unquote a picky eater, laying the groundwork in advance for I'm not feeling great the first time I visit, to be like, if something gets put on the table and it's just not going to be swallowable, it's the, I've already laid the groundwork that I'm not feeling well to be like, I'm really sorry, I don't feel up to eating, I'm really not feeling well, you've heard this from me a bit, from before I saw the food. Future visits, I'll probably have a good sense of, the target of where to be at.
Yeah.
It's I go in the first time at a new place being like, I'm going to assume that they're going to feed me something I can't eat, and I'm going to lay the seeds in case I got to get out of this.
This is the mentioning you're not feeling super well the day before you want a day off sick.
Right?
Yes,
yeah. But I can't eat a tomato because it's two textures and my brain doesn't know what box to put it in.
Oh boy. Tomatoes are still tough for me, yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully, no one ever tried to serve me an orgasming fist-sized chicken that also made the woman across the table orgasm.
It's an orgasmic experience. So I think that just speaks to how moved they all are by this chicken. This is a fine dining experience for them. It's probably the best meal they've eaten all week because they're serving it to a guest for they're meeting their now son-in-law, their instant son-in-law who already has a child with their daughter, as we find out. They're meeting him for the first time, so this must be the best thing they could afford. The grandmother is helping to fix the salad, even though she's seemingly a vegetable herself. But
she doesn't get to go to dinner.
She doesn't. That's right. I hadn't noticed that. Thank you for advocating for her.
She gets to have her cigarette. Maybe the cigarette was dinner.
Oh yeah, I used to be like that.
It's dinner and dessert, baby.
Well, I'm not sure if these were meant to be a fancy meal because the dad points out they're new, they're man-made.
That's true.
He points out, this is a weird novelty. He makes it sound like he wanted to get regular chicken and that wasn't an option. These weird, novel, new, small, a fist ones that are man-made were the only option. And this kind of leads to, Jane, when we saw this at the cinema a few weeks back, you talked about it feeling almost post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, because when Henry first gets to the house and he's standing outside looking over the garden, most of the plants look dead or kind of barren. Like if they've got flowers on, they probably don't have any leaves. There's all this like wind and steam coming in from one side. And like then when you're outside, there's the sort of constant emptiness.
He walks on the train tracks without any problem, as if there's never going to be a train there.
Then you've got the tiny chickens. Could this be because they're coming too soon? Because there has been some issue with radiation? And then you have the baby, which is also premature and is what it is.
Possibly irradiated itself.
Yeah, this does not seem to be a standard premature baby. There could be
No.
more going on.
Well, then we get, the mum says, there's a baby, and Mary replies, they don't even know if it is a baby.
Yeah. Mum jumps in to sort of go, of course, no, it's just premature, as if to sort of be like, we're not getting into the specifics of what you might have given birth to.
Yeah, but I think that the post-apocalyptic thing nods to the tiny picture of the Trinity test explosion, which we saw behind Lynch's desk in Twin Peaks: The Return. He had that giant picture on the wall of exactly the same explosion.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the perfect segue for what I want to say. I find myself bringing the weirdest baggage to Lynch in one way because I never really had too much of a fascination with World War II. I resented how much public school tried to force it down my throat every year. It felt like that was the only thing American schools want to teach about is the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II. Everything else is just gravy and gets left by the side roads unless you take elective classes exploring other specifications. So I'm coming to appreciate the effect of the influence of nuclear warfare from a particular perspective here by starting with episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return, like you say, Jane. And now I think about a lot of what Lynch is trying to tell us from a nuclear perspective, because he outlines for us in that part of Twin Peaks: The Return, spoilers for that nuclear warfare is essentially the ultimate genesis for all of the evil that exists within the Twin Peaks universe, all the twisted things that have been happening there. So it all comes back to a nuclear reading. And like you say, this seems like a post-apocalypse. They legitimately eat meals on the Fallout television show with regularity that look more appetizing than what they're eating in this movie by a long shot.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a crazy thing. And I've tried very hard to come to these podcast recordings with a fresh perspective, not having digested a lot of ancillary media. Have the two of you digested a lot of theory about this movie in general between your two viewings and now, or have you come fairly fresh as well?
Weirdly not Eraserhead. I think it's the only one I've never bothered to look at other people's interpretations of. The only thing I really know about this is that in an interview Lynch said this was his most spiritual work and then refused point blank to explain.
Yeah, I come from a similar place. The closest I've come with Eraserhead is I did a little bit of research after this second viewing today, and we can maybe dip a little bit into it. David Lynch at some point talked about the fact that part of the genesis of this film was he was reading the Christian Bible, and he read a single sentence and went, yep, I know what this film is now. And there is a community of people online trying to work out what sentence of the Bible he read that made Eraserhead happen. And I came to this because separately I was having a big question, which was, what is the significance of 2416, which is the house number of Mary's house, but it's also Henry's house number with his next door, like the woman across the hall from him, with her house, with her room number wedged in the middle of his room number. So I was like, what's the significance of this? Do people have theories? I'm kind of curious. And one of the running theories is that 2416 might be referential to the Bible passage that Lynch read that led him to creating Eraserhead, which people have then started going for chapter 26, verse 14 of a bunch of books of the Bible and comparing them to see which might make sense as the genesis of Eraserhead. That's the closest I've done to research of ancillary thoughts, and that was literally tonight because I saw this number and was like, what's that number about?
Sure. And because at an initial viewing, and I wanted to backtrack because you both brought up a great point, which is that this is a the antithesis of a casual watch or a second screen experience kind of movie, in that every second, even when expository dialogue isn't happening, which is basically never, especially past like the 30-minute mark, very little is explained at all. So despite that, or perhaps even because of it, it demands moment to moment attention in a way that few other things do. And I argue that really a movie or a show that I really want to understand and appreciate on a deeper level, I will watch with rapt attention, which is why it can take me a while to catch up on something like Severance, where I'm not in control of my attention. And I very thankfully am finally caught up as of a few hours ago. Thank God. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. Point is, I just want to stress the importance of, it can sound snobby to say, oh, kids, you got to put your phone down and look at this thing. But even if you sit and look at this thing twice within a few months, I'm sure I could watch it a third time in a couple of weeks and see a bunch of new stuff that completely passed me by. It demands this level of attention over and over.
Yeah, there really is a lot of... And me and Jane were saying this, like, just before we came up to record, was, so the first viewing we did at the cinema, and we just, like, let it soak in. This viewing was at home, and both of us did the same thing, which was sit and make notes, and our notes were very much write what you see kind of notes. And it is amazing what bubbles to the surface when you try to put words to what is happening. It forces you to take in some of those little details.
Yeah, there was a lot of things where I was taking notes, and thoughts I had previously was starting to coalesce a bit more by virtue of writing down exactly every part of that, and then even ADHD, the joys thereof, just being able to scroll back a couple of lines and going, actually, if I put all of this together, I have a theory about the next minute, but I'll come to more of that as we get further along the story.
Sure. And to bridge us to that point in the story, can I ask, and especially I'm interested to hear about this from both of you, from an accessibility standpoint, from an expert standpoint in that department, if I tried briefly to research if descriptive audio of this movie exists as a feature in any way, if there's ever been any showings using descriptive audio, and I can't find any evidence of that. I can find very slim results about Eraserhead on Google these days in general, or search engines, as we don't need to talk about the reasons behind that. But the thing is, it's oblique, and there's not a lot of good ways to tell.
No, I think you're right. I think it would be hard to do audio descriptions, because at that point you are putting very specific words on things that perhaps we are just meant to interpret for ourselves.
What I will say is I think there is benefit at looking at the way that... An example off the top of my head of this kind of thing being done is The Last of Us Part 1, when it got remade a couple of years ago, got audio descriptions added. And I know some of the people that worked on that, and the process involved talking to the original creator as much as possible during the audio description process to ensure that the audio descriptions matched the intent of the creator's original vision without leading too much into a particular reading of it. And I'm specifically thinking of, famously, that game ends on a scene in which one character lies to another, and it is left deliberately ambiguous whether the second person believes the lie they've been told or not. And that is an example of, like, it is possible to write audio descriptions, and this is, the thing that audio description specialists are paid the money they are to do, is to walk that line of describing the abstract without leading to an interpretation. But that is definitely most easily done when the original creator is still alive to give input on, is that descriptive enough versus too descriptive. I have no idea if one exists for Eraserhead. I would be fascinated to know.
Same.
I would be curious to know if it even really could be done in that way. So, and that brings me to say that just like you can't really do an audio description for a viewing of this film, it's similarly difficult to do a plot by plot or a beat by beat plot description of this movie on a podcast in a way that I really love. And I'm sure we wouldn't bring a whole lot to it Anyway, that hasn't been said, but Jane, what in your mind is the next plot detail once the action really gets rolling? Because after the baby is introduced, it again becomes very sparse with communicating anything directly through dialogue. How would you describe what starts to happen once the baby is introduced into the picture here?
So we're almost immediately teleported, because we leave it at Mary's house with Mum says that once you get married, the baby's at the hospital. Once you get married, you can pick up the baby and take it home. And we are then taken to, at Henry's apartment, Mary is attempting to feed the baby. The baby is... She's not being gentle, and the baby is not being helpful at all, in the way that babies can be. I have babysat before, and they can be uniquely just like, no, I'm just being fussy.
I think part of it is, child not opening mouth for food, but part of it is just this very, at the very least, premature baby struggling to keep food down and coughing and sputtering and struggling with the process of eating. If this is a premature baby, incredibly young to be, having food that solid, and at least on this second viewing, part of what I saw was that baby closing their mouth because they were like, no, I'm still struggling with... You're not taking your time with feeding me and I'm struggling, so I'm closing my mouth because I don't know what else to do, because I can't communicate to you I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, she doesn't really have the patience for it. Which I get. It can be very stressful trying to feed a newborn. Yeah. But yeah, there is that moment where I think she sort of holds its face and starts trying to shove whatever is in that jar down its face. From my point of view, I was saying it doesn't feel like it's being helpful, because it looks like it sort of spits it out or sticks its tongue out and tries to get the food off itself.
Almost spitefully so, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I think I had that thought the first time watching it, and on the second viewing, I had a very different thought, which was, it's really weird to read that level of intent into a baby that young. They don't know how to control their bodies at all. Occam's razor, far more likely that baby was not intentionally using its tongue to push the food out. It doesn't know how to use its tongue yet properly. But the first viewing, had that same viewing of it almost being spiteful, and I think that's deliberate, because it's clearly the read that Mary has of the situation is, you're doing this to spite me, not just, you're a baby and you don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily attribute spite, but certainly playfulness or just unwillingness. You don't know if it's not liking the flavour, although I guess at that age probably doesn't have a huge sense of flavour anyway.
Yeah.
We then also have this moment where Henry goes to the mail slot, which he did on the first walk into the apartment. He checks the mail slot, he finds something, and rather than going up to the apartment and opening it, he goes back outside, stands in a doorway, very carefully unwraps it before putting it in his pocket and going back in. And when he walks in, Mary asks, is there any mail? And he says no.
Yeah, I don't know how to read what it is he gets in the mail, because it seems deliberate and like he knew it was coming and knew what it was going to be before he opened it. And this is where I struggle with the metaphor of it being sperm. It seems to be like a tiny little version of whatever that thing is. And he puts it in its little box and eventually hides it in the cupboard. And I don't know what that is he's ordered. And I really struggle with its significance.
I couldn't tell, but on this viewing, I was fairly certain it was a chili pepper. At least the first time he pulls it out. Because there is a scene later on where we see it moving and it looks more like just a worm.
Yeah.
But I would definitely not say it's the same thing that we've been interpreting as sperm the rest of the film.
I don't know. There's other places in the film where I really think it looks like that's what's in the box, but yeah.
So my interpretation this time was maybe it's a chili pepper. Maybe what he's hiding now is his passion.
Yes.
Because now there is a baby on the scene. Now he's hiding that away from himself, and the next time we see it is around the same time he has the experience with the neighbour.
Yes, 1000%.
Is it a baby? Or is it a sperm? Or could it be a chili pepper? You'll have to wait until the next episode of Lynch's Log to find out the rest of our thoughts on David Lynch's Eraserhead.
The happening be happening.
Fix Your Heart or Die podcast is hosted by Shy Fox and produced by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Music by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Sound effects sourced from Pixabay. Check the show notes of this episode for links to our guests' social media and additional resources about the projects they're promoting. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/fixyourheartpod.
Nothing normal happens, but I'm so used to it that to me it is normal.
Dum da dum da 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 dum da dum da 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 dum da dum da 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 da. Why haven't I told you, oh baby, I've told every little star just how sweet I think you are. Why haven't I told you? Da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I've told ripples in a brook made my heart an open book. Why haven't I told you? Friends ask me, am I in love? I always answer yes. Might as well confess if the answer's yes. Maybe you may love me too, oh my darling, if you do. Why haven't you told me? Da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Welcome to the Fix Your Heart or Die podcast network. My name is Shy Fox, and ever since discovering a love of Twin Peaks recently, my mind has taken up full-time residence within its borders. Since entering this Lynchian zone, I have noticed that many seem to find David's work outside of Twin Peaks intimidating to approach. That's why I'm on a quest to also experience his entire catalog and provide a pathway into his genius for my fellow newcomers. So I implore you to come along because, no matter who you are, Lynch's log has something to say to you.
In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. You have your good thing, and I have mine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. In heaven, everything is fine. You have your good things, and I have mine. In heaven, everything is fine.
Previously, our intrepid trio of Eraserhead enthusiasts were deep in discussion of what is that baby? Let's pick it up right where we left it.
See, my interpretation this time was maybe it's a chili pepper. Maybe what he's hiding now is his passion,
Yes.
because now there is a baby on the scene. Now he's, like, hiding that away from himself, and the next time we see it is around the same time he has the experience with the neighbor.
Yes, 1000%, because
Yeah.
that's what it reads to me as. Is it's a very relatable feeling of, and I'll be honest here, this is a very relatable thing. I've been through the traditional man and woman marriage thing where you try to have a family on some level, and when you lock yourself down like that, you Just my language there betrays how I feel about it in a raw way, just as this movie does. On a level, you are dying, and men and women both do this. All genders do this. All people of all identities of all types do this. When you start a new life, you kill your old life to some extent, and you are reborn. And Henry is not prepared to become what he needs to become here, and neither is Mary. Do either of you have a specific bead on, do you both think that Mary is similarly neurodivergent or neurodivergent in a different way that drives her away? What makes our main character the one who's able to stick around through this? Is it just what he does, or is there something separating their abilities here in some way?
I think for Mary, it's hard to tell because we don't really spend enough time with her.
Yeah.
But as someone who is neurodiverse, and most of my friends are neurodiverse, and my wife is neurodiverse, and I'm fairly certain our cat's neurodiverse, it feels like you tend to surround yourself with people who you even vaguely understand you. And maybe that's not the case here. Maybe she's not neurodiverse, and that's why they hadn't seen each other seemingly for however many months since they consummated that relationship.
Yeah, you don't really come around anymore, he says, which is very open-ended, but implies a long yearning has been going on, right?
Well, he beheaded her photograph.
Yeah. My reading is, and this is based on very little textual evidence, is that she is neurodiverse to some degree as well, and that she is also struggling with the sensory reality of what's going on. I think the difference of why she is able to leave and he isn't, to me, boils down to she has somewhere to leave to. She has parents she can move back in with who clearly she was living with up until the moment that this baby came into the picture, whereas Henry is presented, for whatever reason, as living by himself, being a working adult with his own place. He doesn't have a fallback option of place to go. Because she was the one to leave first, he can't leave without leaving nothing. And therefore it's been put, you're the one who at the end of the day will have to be here.
He's the dad who stepped up. Yeah. We're all thinking
it. Whether he's ready to do it or not is the thing, but he's at least trying to stick through it.
Which I definitely thought this time, the moment where, like, almost as soon as Mary leaves, he checks the baby's temperature, and then the following scene, he's just sort of sat there, he's finally got his jacket off, he's sat there next to the baby, he's got the steamer on, the baby is clearly struggling to breathe, and he's doing the job. Like, he's kind of resigned to, okay, I'm the only one here now, I am responsible, and I will do the responsible thing.
He's clearly struggling, but he recognizes, no matter how much I'm struggling, there is a vulnerable thing here that needs looking after. And to a certain degree, that has to override all of the everything that's happening at me. Which, this is a slight tangent, I hope this is alright. I want to bring up a personal anecdote that,
Absolutely.
This film made me think about a thing from my personal life while watching it that, I've been mulling over and I want to put words to. The way that the descriptions of this film talk about the Eraserhead baby is as this disgusting, malformed, horrific thing. And I just cannot see this baby that way. I'm like, no, it's, this does not look like a standard baby, but it's very clearly just a small thing that needs love and protection. And it's weird to think that anyone could feel quite that aggressively negative about it, regardless of anything else. And the thing that I keep thinking about in the early part of this film is a personal story for me. My biological dad did not stick around. He told me I was 6 or 7 when he told me the reason he cheated on my mum and left our family was because I cried too much. I wouldn't stop crying. I was a constantly crying, always making noise, always crying child, and that's why he cheated on mum and walked out on us.
My fucking God.
Right. But watching this, and specifically watching Mary go, I just need one night away, I can't do this, and then seemingly not come back or keep leaving and clearly not be willing to stick in for things that this kid cannot control. It's the thing that I think makes me really respect Henry in a lot of the early part of this film, is that he stays. I feel like we get much more insight into his struggles with the sensory reality of this baby than we do into Mary's experience. Like, you know, I read that Mary is also neurodiverse to some degree, and that is part of her struggling with the sound that the baby is making. But we see from Henry's perspective quite how overwhelming his sensory struggles are. And yet he still stays. And yet he still, you know, at least in this early portion of the film, tries to go, that's not an excuse to not be here. And that was just a thought I kept having during this early portion of the film, like during the part where he is, you know, looking after the baby while, like, the temperature is raised and whatnot, is you're at least going, it's not your fault and you are in need of help, even if you are an overwhelming thing. So anyway, that was a bit of a diversion, but it was just a thought I wanted to place a wedge in.
Yeah.
It illustrates the overall point that I wanted to get back to beautifully. You could not have planned that better, honestly. I'm kind of just aghast at the fact that, so you talk about how he's admirable for sticking around, and that's such an easy thing to say, but ultimately, I mean, as we get through the film, he does literally die possibly several times on several different planes of existence before our eyes by the end of this movie. So he does sacrifice himself, and you talk about the mail order item being something like a chili pepper or something like a worm, and just the fact that it's some sort of foreign element, I think, is what's important there. It's a spice of some sort. It's bringing passion into his life. I think that's why that's a key moment, is that's the moment where he's inviting his true hidden self back into his family dynamic. And from then on, he's not the family Henry anymore. He has that corrupting influence of his young adult male selfishness creeping back in at all times, represented possibly by the steam and the throbbing hum of electricity and all these things that are coming in from the outside world. There's a longing in Lynch's work for the days when you could leave the city and go home and things were quiet and you could just decompress. Because now you go home and things are humming and beeping and ringing at you at all hours of the day. Babies are crying at you. Women are asking you to do things other than sit around and meditate. It's tough out there, I'm sure. I can attest to that. But the baby gets worse off the more he invites this evil of his past life and his inner urges back into it, and the steam is suffocating the baby, and at Henry's enrichment, but at the baby's expense. It's not hard to see the parallels here. He has to sacrifice in order to be what this baby needs him to be, because a father's job and a mother's job is to eventually die and allow the baby to flourish in some form. That's just cut and dry.
Yeah.
I mean, that's life.
Also, very quickly, to that point you were making about, like, the inescapability of the noise in the world, my favourite moment of that being exemplified in this film is right at the start when Henry is floating in the void of space, and even in the void of space there is this distracting hum you can't get away from. Not even in the vacuum of space will the background hum be tune-outable.
Inescapable, even in the stratosphere and beyond.
Yeah, I thought there was quite an interesting moment, talking vaguely about longing, where just before Mary leaves, you see Henry lying in bed and he's got his eyes open and he's just sort of staring into nothingness. And then it cuts to a shot from his perspective, but at that point, Mary looks so much further across the bed than she did in the wide shot. He is sensing that distance between them, like moments before she gets up and leaves.
And we've all been there, right? We've all felt that moment in a relationship when, even before anything has really been said or done, there's sort of an emotional passing that happens between two people, just like ships in the night. Before you even know that you've drifted too far apart for things to be reconcilable, it's already gone. You've already lost track of one another, and you both kind of knew it in the moment maybe, but no one was going to talk about it for a good long time, sometimes until they die. I admire the courage it takes for David Lynch to show us this is how he feels about these things, and to allow the fact that, like we say, he's not aggrandizing them or trying to make these seem like traits that we should be aspiring to. We shouldn't aspire to look at a baby and think, is that stupid thing spiting me by spitting out the food? It's not even grateful for the food I gave it. We've all felt that, but we're pieces of shit for feeling that way, and he agrees.
I think it's notable that one of the last things we hear Mary say before, Henry turns over and sees that distance is her screaming at the baby to shut up. And it's one of those moments where it's like, it really feels like it is representing that kind of moment in a relationship where you go, I couldn't tell you right now that that's why it happened, but something happened and suddenly you feel that something's irreparably changed.
Yeah, maybe even that isn't the specific problem, but that is the reason that you blew up at that moment.
Yeah.
That was the final straw.
Which is the real reason why a parent could leave and then ascribe it to a child's fault. They really could be emotionally immature enough to think that and boil it down to that because of a moment like that, but they shouldn't, obviously.
No, it's, that was just the last thing they were thinking about before the polarity flipped and they were like, nope, limit done.
I think it's interesting as well because the moment leading up to that, you've got the electrical hum, a clock ticking.
Yeah.
You've got the radiator still hissing, but the baby is crying in a way that is completely inconsistent.
Yeah.
And whereas everything else is at least starting to become white noise, that is so inconsistent that it's constantly getting at you.
But again, I think one thing that's really important to think about here is, like, with this baby, this is a really overcomable problem if these two were to work as a pair, as parents. This is not a child that is being breastfed. This is not a child who is reliant during the night on presence of the breastfeeding parent. This is one parent could just go for a nighttime walk with this baby and just go walk for an hour or two so that the other parent can get some sleep. Tag team it if you have to. There is no reason you can't facilitate your partner getting some sleep during this. But instead, both of them lie there not getting sleep together in a way that, like, there are ways around that, but that would require you to stop and talk about the problem that's happening and make a plan as a team. And that is not where those two are at.
They definitely aren't communicating well at all. In fact, they're not really communicating until something reaches breaking point.
Yeah. It's much like the radiator. It's not until the pressure starts to get too high that any sound's happening.
And we know so little about their relationship in that way, but we know so much because there's so little direct dialogue between them. So much of it is characters talking to them, around them, that explains their dynamic in relation to one another. But there's so many things that make you think, because the fact that they even had sex or had a relationship is a complete... To them, we never see any sort of real depiction of that, so it's almost like it didn't happen to either of them, and it barely registered to them. It's just sort of something that happened between them that they don't understand why they even did. And now they have this whole new situation. Their entire life is changed by this momentary decision initially, and they're just left adrift in this without even really remembering why they wanted any of this in the first place or even got near each other.
They were literally left holding the baby.
It feels like when a couple of, like, 16-year-olds get pregnant, where it's like, the thought that a baby could happen, logical knowledge, but, like, never gonna happen to us. The idea of the sacrifices that parenthood would require being on the table is not something they're emotionally prepared for. That is not what life was going to be.
Yeah, and given Lynch's great love of everything sort of 1940s and 50s and that era, how good was the sex ed back then? So what did they even know before this this thing happened.
I'm gonna guess the sex ed was that first radiator lady scene we got of her doing a little shuffle dance and stamping on sperm. That's their sex ed lesson, is don't worry about it. A lady whose face looks kind of like the moon with chubby cheeks, she'll just stamp on them. It'll be fine.
I kept referring to her in my notes and in previous conversations as the hamster lady.
Oh, sure.
She's sort of shuffling around on the stage with these big hamster cheeks, with a slightly cheeky grin on her face, just standing on these sperm that then squirt out white liquid.
Something about the way she was presented that reminded me of the old silent film, A Trip to the Moon. Almost that sort of like... almost like painting with icing onto a face to give that sort of like white, craggy, light doesn't reflect off it properly appearance.
She was just missing a rocket ship in the eye.
Well, I don't think that's an accident, right? Because the moon facedness, now that you mention it, I hadn't even thought about that. But it makes so much sense when the movie opens with a crash landing on the moon of this sperm-like creature. So the moon is just used as a general metaphor for the womb, or just the concept of conception in general here.
Historically, the moon has been used as like metaphor for the human egg and for fertility for a long time, and I think like the moon shows up very much at points being like, the sort of wormy looking thing went into the moon. We know how reproduction works.
And we all know that David Lynch might be connected to the moon, famously. So this is where he started showing that directly to us. And I guess that brings us to our next topic. You've both alluded to vaguely to overall theories about this you're saving for later. Here we are, it's later. Jane, what is your overarching theory? What is your hot take on this almost 50-year-old movie that we can all definitely say something completely original about, right?
I don't know if it's a hot take because I haven't really discussed it with others, but
yeah.
I think obviously we do have that initial sense of somebody who is overwhelmed, somebody who isn't ready to be a father, but then is prepared to be so, and then feels separated. And then there's just a moment heading towards the end where he's in bed, and something about the sequence of events, I will need to check my notes again in a second, it just feels like he masturbates in bed, then falls asleep, as you do, and then there is just this potential dream sequence that then rounds back to either he wakes up before cutting the dressings off, or he doesn't. But then there is that whole bizarre ending. But I think it is very much about being a man in a situation that is overwhelming and terrifying and not really knowing what to do, but still being just a guy with just all the guy responses to things.
I'm just going to give the reading that I was thinking about during this second watch, and I don't think this is like a definitive or correct viewing, but it's one that stuck in my head, which is the moon woman in the radiator stamping on these what appear to be almost like fetuses with umbilical cords. To me, reads like, hey, maybe abortion wouldn't have been so bad, and maybe if this premature baby who is already unwell and, is struggling to survive doesn't happen to survive, maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for you.
Because in heaven, everything is fine.
In heaven, everything's perfect. In heaven, everything is fine. Like, the first time we see the radiator lady, she is stamping on these things with a big smile on her face, being like, it's alright, don't worry about it. This is a perfectly normal, average thing to do. Second time we see her, she is singing, in heaven, everything's fine. Don't worry about it, everything's fine in heaven. Which leads toward, eventually, Henry cutting off the bandages and stabbing his scissors into this baby, where the literal or metaphorical feels like, hey, this baby is suffering, and maybe I've convinced myself that it is morally okay for me to either actively kill or allow to die this baby, because everything's perfect in heaven, the baby won't be suffering in heaven, everything's perfect and fine there, and the fact that I will get my life back and my ability to have the passions and things that I enjoy, for ideas to be born from my mind, as my mind becoming literally the pencil that scribes my ideas to Paige, maybe that will be okay and I'll be allowed to do that as a nice consequence or just happy little accident of this baby being dead. Don't worry about it. It's fine. They're going to go to heaven. It's all okay.
Just shoot them all and let God sort them out. That's what I always say here in the heartland of America.
Right, there's parts in the latter act of this film where it really does feel like a man trying to convince himself it's okay to let his baby die, and that, it's fine to let that happen.
And to be generous about it, because there's a very easy way, like in all these movies, to read it's a dream into any particular sequence, but especially because we eventually leave off on a place where the baby continues to be alive at his expense almost, that generously we could say that he, like all of us, is allowed to have a fantasy about what it's like to be so overwhelmed that you would do something like an atrocity, like abandon or actively murder a baby. It's okay to have a fantasy about that as long as you're not actually doing it. Or if it's not okay, it's at least better in comparison to being the one who actually left the baby. Or perhaps he posits through the avenue of that fantasy, maybe it would have been better if on various levels, whether it had been pre-planning or, like you say, some sort of abortion procedure, for this baby to have not happened because of the circumstances in which the parents live. And that's a line that anyone who's tried to be a parent or a mentor or just have a relationship with anyone on any level that's a supportive one where you're trying to bring the other person up, you can relate to a feeling of, is it better if I don't get involved in this relationship at all? Can I actually bring enough good to the table here to justify bringing myself into this situation? Can I actually raise a child responsibly enough to justify having had it at all?
I think something you said earlier is really interesting in this context, which is about the idea of to successfully raise a child is to ultimately sacrifice yourself to some degree for their benefit. There is so much imagery during the dream-esque sequence of the baby literally replacing Henry. Henry's suit being walked around with this baby for a head is ultimately, it's not about you getting to live your life anymore. It's about your life existing so that your baby can end up walking around the world and doing the things that you would be doing.
Yeah, they turn out to be your doppelganger, and then they literally take your place. They start off as an extension of you, and effectively they become you. They become your only lasting legacy into the world, which splinters off further, through generations. These are all very well explored ideas within the realm of fiction, but Jane, I was really struggling. I'd like to know, because you seem like you probably have a greater breadth and depth of knowledge of pop culture in some ways than I do. Have you encountered something that this movie is almost 50 years old? As I said, it's 48 as of this year. They started making it over 50 years ago because it was very protracted. Anyway, very old expression of very well-trodden ideas. In your experience, have you seen a better cinematic representation of these exact ideas within about 80 minutes? What else has expressed this so concisely?
I genuinely can't think of anything, and there have been times in my life where I would get through 6 or 7 films a week, maybe more, and maybe it was the genres I was watching. These things together are not something I can think has been approached in the same way. Like, we've had lots of things about getting someone pregnant, or getting pregnant with someone, and the fear around being an expectant parent. But I don't think we've had anything necessarily that captures the, okay, I have a child, it's got a lot of needs, and I am not ready for that. And the person who I was expecting to be by my side during that has just run off in the middle of the night.
I try and think of anything similar to this, and I find myself thinking, like, there's a lot of horror films that will center on, like, the horror that is the unexpected baby taking up more of your life than expected and being the sort of drain on you, portrayed as, like, the baby as the monster. You see versions of this that are, like, much more grounded real world takes on disabled children that can get a bit, oh, woe is me, how terrible a life I have with this disabled child. I don't know anything that quite like this frames, yes, it is a real struggle that the parent is going through. Yes, it is understandable to a degree the struggle and suffering the parent is having, but that ultimately this is not the baby's fault, and that the baby is doing nothing malicious, nothing harmful, even when it's perceived to be so. Like, the moment in this film where it almost seems like the baby is laughing at Henry, like a mocking laugh. That infant is way too young to be deliberately mocking you. It portrays, yes, you might interpret intent from a child of that age, but they are ultimately vulnerable and weak and relying on you to not read into it too much and just look after them. And I can't point at anything else that captures that, and I think it's why Eraserhead stands up so well.
Yeah, I think there's a moment where Henry's just sort of got the baby to settle down after Mary's left. And he's like, okay, baby's settled, baby's quiet. I'm just going to get up and maybe see if I can check on the neighbour. And every time he like touches the doorknob, the baby starts crying again. And again, as someone who's looked after a very young baby, for someone who was out of their mind with like, I'm not ready to be a parent. Yeah, absolutely. I can understand that frustration of, I stepped away for a minute. I just needed a second for something, for me, for my own self. And yeah, I can understand how that, especially when you're sleep deprived, overwhelmed anyway.
And doing autistic pattern recognition.
Yeah, to suddenly go, yeah, the baby is picking on me now. I can't have a moment to myself to perv on the neighbour.
The number of people who will talk about their infants as actively being malicious at that age, it's like, no, but sleep deprivation will do that, as will the human tendency to recognize behaviors that you've seen before and attribute them in new situations.
Yeah, you assume if you're being sleep deprived by something that it's doing it as a malicious act because it's, for one thing, wearing on your sanity to make such discernments, but also because you're used to that being a tactic that's only used in emergencies or for predatory circumstances. So it keeps you on edge, activates your fight or flight or fawn at all times. And again, the way in which this feels like a public service in rendering the autistic experience, especially on screen, it should be applauded, because that's another way this still holds up so well 50 years on. I don't think that I could show someone a better movie. And so we started off talking, this is a really good capper. Wow, we're good at this, guys. Congratulations. So we started off by talking about how difficult it was to find a guest for this. I mean, I don't have all of that many resources. I basically just kind of put some general vibes out there to people who have expressed vague interest in being on this show or are in our Discord, essentially. So it wasn't like it was a monumental feat, but I do get the impression when I venture out and I hear things about this movie, I get the impression that people think it is impenetrable, that it is so incredibly inscrutable that it's almost scary. Scary is a word I hear being used to describe this film, not only as a way to describe that it has horrific content, but that it's also scary because it's the kind of movie where if you watch it with someone who wants you to watch it, as so many people are onboarded into films like this, by a significant other who demands that they watch it, for instance, so they can understand them. It's presented under those circumstances. It can feel daunting to watch a movie like this and quote unquote not get it. But the thing is that people should feel comfortable with the fact that if you are sitting and paying attention to this film and you're really applying this level of thought to it, which is just, what could this mean on screen? Could this be about a baby? That's really all you need to take something away from this. Is this about parenthood is all you need. And it gives you that on a silver platter. Everything else in terms of analysis like this is just pure gravy and enriches the viewing experience. But it's hard to think of a better way to onboard people into Lynch, since it's his first feature film especially, and it's brisk and it demands direct, immediate attention. And of course, Twin Peaks The Return is perhaps his most representative work of his whole career, but this is his flashpoint for a reason. And it feels a lot like when you're trying to describe the autistic experience to someone and you're telling people things that to you feel so thuddingly obvious that you've never even considered they don't think about. Things like the thrum of electricity getting to you, things like not being able to tune out the crying of a baby, which I think a lot of successful parents, they are lucky enough to be able to tune it out, at least in the right way under non-emergency circumstances. It doesn't wear on everyone the same way. Not everyone is equal in the way they are ensnared by their senses to this extent. So the point is, when you try to get someone to watch this movie and they feel like it's a daunting task or impenetrable, that's sort of how you feel when you try to describe what to you are very obvious things. You think you're being very literal. We all think we're being very communicative all the time, that we lay out the rules for our so-called neurotypical friends, but they keep coming back with this feedback that we're inscrutable. We never told them this. Why wouldn't we mention this if it was so important to us? And if you have to show someone a movie for 80 minutes about what it's like to be autistic, this is the best one. And I'm just going to say it. I'll lay it on the table.
True.
You might have to mention that, the fist-sized chicken having an orgasm isn't necessarily part of the metaphor, but I think there's a lot of very good metaphor there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I think you mentioned Twin Peaks The Return, watching this again post-return, so much of this feels like it touches on moments from Twin Peaks and especially The Return.
Yeah.
We have walking into the lobby of the apartment building, we've got the zigzag floors, we've got 2 chairs, we've got an end table. Mm-hmm. It's basically the setup from the lodge, from the Red Room. We've got the person with the levers.
Oh, yeah. We got the tree.
Yeah, we got the tree, which very much reminds me of the arm.
The tree, the evolution of the arm, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got the arm on the brain. I love thinking about that guy.
Well, the piles of dirt around Henry's apartment with just, twigs poking out of them, it's supposed to be nourishing and life-giving, but everything there is dead. Again, very much representative of the evolution of the arm. You've got the sparking electrical plug at the end, which very much reminds me of...
Good old Dougie Jones.
Dougie!
Yeah.
I was like, it's not Dickie. Yeah, Dougie. And then you've got the levers feels very much like the operation of things behind the scene, stuff you get with the fireman. The woman in the radiator kind of reminds me of the diva that's on stage and gathering the spirit of Laura Palmer into the world.
Senorita Dido, I believe is her name in the script.
It's the most directly that watching one of Lynch's films, I've gone, this feels like Twin Peaks. Even though, it's, genre-wise or, narrative pacing-wise, not the same. It's not the same genre of story told in the same way. But it feels the most like it is trying to play in the same pool of metaphors as Twin Peaks, and the same, unstated language of what background elements are supposed to communicate as Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I think the closest I felt recently was watching Wild at Heart with the horse on the radio.
Oh, yeah.
And the horse is watching her, she's watching the horse, and we're watching her watching the horse.
It's incredible how he just keeps revisiting these themes in ways that every time he tells us about them, they're so recognizable as echoes of one another, and yet every time there's a fresh twist and a fresh take, and you don't feel like it's overworn its welcome. The fact that episode 8 of Twin Peaks The Return feels as much like a sequel to Eraserhead as it feels like a sequel to anything happening in Twin Peaks is just a monumental achievement, considering how distant those things can be and how wide their breadth is, while the elements still remain so recognizable. And I think that's what brings this so beautifully into the fold of the overall message of the show, which is I started off not wanting to cover actual David Lynch material and just wanting to cover David Lynch by way of things inspired by it, because I think, what do I have to say about Eraserhead that's original? But I'm coming at this purely as a person who gets into it through Twin Peaks, which I think is how a lot of people can and should find an avenue into this. So even though it may seem bizarre and impenetrable to watch Eraserhead, I know it looks like a weird black and white movie. I know it looks really, really old, but it's only really old. Don't get me wrong. It's not from the 40s or the 50s. This one has sound, kids. I trust me, even if you have to wait a while for anyone to talk, it's a talkie. So really, it feels so starkly outdated, yet so modern in a way. It feels incredibly, and timeless is a hacky word to use, but it feels so timeless in the way that so much about everything in David Lynch's work feels unmoored from time, often the literal plot itself. Boy, it's so much fun to think about this all the time. I don't know how I ever survived without it, you guys.
It sure has been fun having an excuse to overthink David Lynch recently. There's a reason that the word Lynchian has a meaning to it. He is a man who sure did create a body of work with a lot of weird consistency throughout.
And Jane, do you even remember what your life was like before you met David Lynch?
Yes, but it was a much lesser experience, and I had even less ways to not relate to people.
There you go, and fewer tools to do it with. And speaking of tools that you use to relate to people, if I, like any sensible person listening to this, have heard your thoughts on Eraserhead and think, I want to hear what you think about more things, where could I go to do that, my dear friend?
You can find me at linktree, linktree.ee/Janiac, Janiac. I've got a Patreon, patreon.com/stonedmonkeyradio. Laura and I do a podcast called Queer and Pleasant Strangers. If you look for Stoned Monkey Radio on just about anywhere that does podcasts, you can hear us talking about things we've watched, played, and listened to, and doing silly voices and skits.
Incredible. And I'm sure you pop up on all sorts of things all the time, don't you? Have you been a guest on any other shows recently that people could check out too?
I've recently become a regular host on Human Tolerant News, where we talk about nice news stories that have happened during the week and just have a good time chatting to each other about woolly mice or whatever else is going on at the moment. And
what's going on with woolly mice? Hold on. Let's pause the plugs real quick. This is urgent.
They're transing the mice, among other things. They've decided to put the woolly DNA of woolly mammoths into mice to see if they can make woolly mammoths. But they're not really making woolly mammoths. They're taking Asian elephants and putting the woolly mammoth gene into it so that they can kind of make woolly mammoths.
Wow.
Step 1, woolly mice.
All right.
And they look adorable, but, don't be mean to the mice.
But at what
They're
cost?
adorable. Fluffy mice.
Laura, if people want to support causes other than torturing mice, where might they find your body of work, which has no financial incentive toward really the misery of any rodents?
You can find the things I do at Laura K. Buzz wherever you find people. Patreon, that's the one that pays the bills. LauraKBuzz.com, Laura K. Buzz on YouTube. It'll all be out probably by the time you hear this. There's a series I've been doing on YouTube called Abletop, where I talk about board game accessibility. Go check out all 6 episodes of that I co-host with Carrie Waterton. Laura K. Buzz, I do too many projects. Go find them.
Exactly, including, of course, the Podquisition podcast, where you discuss current gaming news. That's basically what we're spun off of a spin-off from a spin-off of somewhat. And
I talk about video games and occasionally vinegar Doritos or some such nonsense.
Yeah, those things sounded like, I'm not a big salt and vinegar chip person, but that might win me over. I don't know if those exist in my country or not, but I might seek them out just for the pure sensory.
It was surprisingly pleasant. They were an odd experience.
Yeah.
So odd that we still haven't finished them.
Oh, there you go. You're saving them for a special occasion, I'm sure. They're now the fancy chips that you'll get out and
look. They're an intense chip. I'll say that. They're a lot.
Not an everyday chip.
If our cat brings a boy home that's got her pregnant, then we'll have some of the man-made chips.
Oh, yeah. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me here. It's been a real pleasure. I think we've really found a good hour and a half to talk about an hour and a half film. Almost exactly neat. Wow. every time I come to this and I say to myself, what can I possibly say about this? And then it's not just what I say, it's just what I get to hear that I haven't heard anywhere else. And I, like the two of you, I haven't gone out and sought a lot of academic opinions about this like we established there, but I feel like all three of us are like right on the money on this, and yet we brought something new to the table, and I'm so extremely impressed with both of you because it was just a joy. Seriously.
Thank you for having us.
Always happy to have an excuse to waffle about Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
And Jane, the door is open to you or anyone you know. If you know anyone who has any of these thoughts, as I'm sure you have magnetized to other Lynch fans throughout the years, if you know anyone who knows anything about this stuff, you want to bring them on, talk to them. I don't even have to be here. Just say something cool about Lynch anytime, and I want a microphone held up to it, okay? I'll be listening in.
I'll keep my dictaphone handy.
You gotta, Diane, you gotta.
The happening will be happening.
Fix Your Heart or Die podcast is hosted by Shy Fox and produced by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Music by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Sound effects sourced from Pixabay. Check the show notes of this episode for links to our guests' social media and additional resources about the projects they're promoting. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/fixyourheartpod.
You can come or you don't have to.